Hey, I'm Nick.
And I'm Allie.
And this is But Have You Tried from the David A. Howe Public Library. Today, Allie's special assignment is to be talking about X-Men, the movie from the year 2000, which you technically were alive for.
I was alive.
This is within your lifetime.
I mean, depending when in the year it was.
Yeah.
3 months
but
old
you existed.
to a year.
You existed, and that's all that matters. I was probably a junior in high school when this movie came out, and I was very excited for it. But first, how's your fall going? How you doing?
Good.
How
Pretty
you doing?
good. You know, I feel like every fall I make this whole plan for myself, almost like a bucket list. I'm like, I need to, fall goes so quick, you know? I need to really get the most out of it. Here's all the things, the fall activities that I need to do. And I tried really hard this year not to make myself a bucket list because I always get disappointed when inevitably I do not complete all my fall bucket list items. But more of kind of like a state of mind. Like, here's the kinds of things we're going to be doing this fall.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've been succeeding at that pretty well.
Okay. I have gotten several batches of local apples, which is my favorite thing about fall. The other day, Kate Miller, the children's librarian, she and I we were talking about programs and stuff, and I was like, let's go over to the Creative Arts Center, and we both got pumpkin spice lattes.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah, so we're just sitting there, and I'm like, I think I have to get a pumpkin spice latte. And she was like,
You're
yeah,
obligated.
Me too. So we were very basic and got them, but they were very good, so I have no complaints about that.
It worked out for you.
Yeah.
Good.
Yep. Good. We cleaned out the garage, which was a big, big thing on the list before winter sets in. But yeah, I'm enjoying the leaves. I'm enjoying breaking out the cardigans. And you, I mean, how many layers do you have on right now?
So many layers.
Yeah.
Wearing two pants, 3 sweaters.
It's a good time. Yeah. Yep. Now, if you have been following along in this feed, you've probably heard of the bonus episodes where Allie and I guest hosted previously on X-Men, where we talked about really more like Spider-Man crossovers featuring the X-Men. So up until this point, that's largely been your experience with the X-Men as a whole, would
Correct.
you say?
After we did those crossovers, I did watch a couple episodes of X-Men the Animated Series.
I remember that now.
Not that many. I think there was just too much else going on.
Yes.
And so we didn't get very far.
But you watched some.
But I watched a few.
Okay.
And beyond that, just occasionally in a comic book that I've read, there'll be some X-Men characters.
Okay.
Just popping up.
All right. So my X-Men experience goes back a long time ago. There was, in the early 80s, they did a pilot for a series called Pride of the X-Men, and it was like a Kitty Pryde-centric story. And it never went to be a series, but they put out that pilot. It was on VHS, and they aired it a lot. So I've seen that pilot a million times. And then they used all those character designs for the X-Men arcade game, which is legendary. I mean, it was a staple in every arcade in the 90s. And I have played through that game a million times. And every time I'm at a retro place that has it, I have to go play that X-Men arcade. That's some of my earliest superhero memories. That and the show Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which featured Iceman and Firestar, who were former X-Men, and the X-Men would pop up in that. So that's the earliest days of my X-Men fandom. But I was big into the 90s X-Men animated series. And then when these movies came out, and of course, just the comics, I would do deep dives into quarter bins and grab X-Men comics because I love the team. I love how imperfect they are. I love that it's not, the Justice League is such this shiny Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and the X-Men is all these hot mess of people thrown together with a lot of personal problems. It's much more soapy in a way that I just liked. I liked Wolverine's messy crush on Jean Grey. I liked the whole Rogue Gambit thing. I liked how Magneto and Professor X kind of have similar goals but have these very different approaches. There's just a lot to sink into in X-Men. And I feel like the movies captured it really well. I was excited when they came out. So I know you've got some facts, so hit me with some X-Men facts on the movie.
I've got some facts about this movie, which came out when I was a babe.
Yes, a babe.
This was directed by Bryan Singer, written by David Hayter, Bryan Singer, and Tom DeSanto.
Yes.
Starring...
As you'll recall, David Hayter voiced Captain America in the crossover that we did.
Okay, I was like, why is that name so incredibly familiar?
Yes.
That explains so much.
He voiced Captain America, and over on Previously on X-Men, the show we partnered with, Hillary and Eric interviewed him about writing this movie. And they also have some episodes specifically about this movie, and just all things X-Men. So, here's a plug for Previously on X-Men. But
absolutely.
Yes, you were about to tell me this powerhouse cast.
I am so relieved, though, that now I know why I recognize that name.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
It's a learning show.
starring, among others, because there's a lot of people in this movie, because it's a team movie. But some highlights: Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen,
right.
Hugh Jackman, and Anna Paquin plays Rogue.
I had I don't know. I had such a crush on Anna Paquin as Rogue in these movies because I was the perfect age. You know what I mean?
Right,
I was like 17.
Right,
and I remember I had a friend who worked at a movie theater and she got me a little Rogue button that was just a movie theater thing. I had it on my backpack for years until it eventually fell off. And that breaks my heart. But yeah,
that is tragic.
I mean, Halle Berry, it's a great cast.
It's a great cast
all around. I always feel like Halle Berry is underutilized as Storm throughout the whole series. Storm is such a strong character, as we discussed in our Spider-Man episodes, and she just doesn't have a lot to do. And this is Halle Berry.
I think that's fair.
Academy Award winner Halle Berry as Storm, and it's like
you'd think that would be great.
She's like a background extra.
Yeah,
but, yeah.
Sometimes that happens. It can be hard, I feel like, with ensemble movies to like really give everyone enough time, enough to do.
I guess I feel like you almost have to downplay Halle Berry for her not to just kind of come to
take over
front. Yeah, so and especially because
a strategic move.
Storm is like the leader of the X-Men for a lot of the comic history. So anyway,
more facts. This movie was in the works starting in 1984 with Orion Pictures. I know.
Wow.
And then there was like some movement, some changing of who was going to be part of it and everything. And then 20th Century Fox bought the rights in 1994. And the script went through some more versions after that. Apparently Beast and Nightcrawler were supposed to be in it originally, but they cut them out because of budget concerns.
Sure.
Which I understand. Like constantly having to do special effects every time Beast is anywhere, which he would be a lot.
Right.
That could be a lot. I think it's a shame though, because Beast is cool.
Well, if you keep watching the series, you may just see a Beast or two.
Good to know. Hugh Jackman apparently was a last-minute pick for Wolverine. They cast him 3 weeks into filming.
Yeah, because originally it was Dougray Scott was cast as Wolverine. If you've ever seen Ever After with Drew Barrymore, where she's Cinderella, he plays the prince. He's also the villain in Mission Impossible 2 and was in Batwoman. But that's wild casting. I don't get that at all. But yeah, Hugh Jackman was a late addition for sure.
Oh yeah, I think I have seen Ever After.
Yeah. I don't mean, did they even audition for Professor X? I feel like they were just like, why? Patrick Stewart exists, so let's just...
I think it's hilarious that they like have the movie start with like him doing a little monologue to just like this kind of abstract, right? It feels very next gen, you know?
Yeah, it's true. There are some crossover X-Men, Star Trek comic books and a full novel called Planet X by Michael Jan Friedman. And in the novel, they're like, Picard and Professor X look kind of similar. Of course.
That's funny.
Yeah, and Famke Janssen was in Next Generation. She had a lot of scenes with Patrick Stewart, so it's kind of funny.
Okay, so as they were going through all the character development, and it sounds like there were a ton of different possible versions of how the script was going to go, which I think is really interesting and kind of makes sense because there's so many things you can do with the X-Men because there's just a lot to dive into. But apparently, at one point, they were considering a storyline where they have Jubilee kind of in a similar role to Rogue in the movie. And they decided to go with Rogue because of her powers and like all the kind of thematic.
Well, Jubilee, I think, would have been the obvious choice coming off the heels of the animated series where Jubilee is such a prominent character in that role,
And one thing I was thinking when we were watching this movie is that like the beginning reminds me a little bit of those first few episodes of the animated series where it's like there's this teen mutant girl who's like, I don't know what's going on, and everyone else is like, come to the mansion with us. That'll solve your problems.
It's funny to hear that Rogue was kind of a fill-in for Jubilee in that way, because Jubilee was really a fill-in for Kitty Pryde or Shadowcat in the comics. I don't know if you're familiar with that character at all.
Not much.
Elliot Page eventually plays Kitty Pryde later on. Okay. And Kitty and Jubilee both have like little cameos in this movie. Kitty runs through a door at one point, and Jubilee basically just has a yellow coat and glasses, so you know it's her. But
that's all you need, I suppose.
That's pretty much it. But yeah, that whole Wolverine is like reluctant, grouchy dad thing is always present, I think, in any iteration of X-Men. Sooner or later that comes out because it's a fun dynamic to play,
It has a good energy. I feel like there's just an everlasting appeal about any story that has sort of like a a little bit of a found family dynamic,
for
or
sure.
like a figure who's
sure.
kind of filling a dad role,
Yeah.
but maybe wasn't wanting to or planning to,
Yeah.
and kind of you see the soft side of this grumpy figure. I feel like
Yeah.
that's just always really fun.
Well, it's kind of interesting too because I think it's such a core that Magneto and the Professor are kind of playing out this whole like two sides of the same coin situation, and then within the X-Men you have that dynamic somewhat with Cyclops and Wolverine as well. Where it's like they both want to do good, but one of them doesn't mind getting their hands dirty, and the other's like, we must follow the rules.
The one remaining fact I have is that some of the interior shots of the mansion were filmed in Casa Loma, which is in Toronto, which I visited this spring.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
So you were there. You
I
were
was
in
there.
the X-Mansion.
Yeah.
Nice.
We went, there's like this basement hallway where they like have movie posters for all
Yeah.
the movies that were filmed there, which is a lot,
Yeah.
incidentally. And Caleb was like, wait a second, this was in the X-Men movie, and he lost his mind.
Nice. I
Yeah.
love to hear it. Yeah. I don't know. I think the externals and some of the internals are also used as, it was used as the X Mansion in the TV series Generation X years before. It's the Luthor Mansion in Smallville. It's the Queen Mansion in the Arrowverse, so yeah, it gets a lot of play. So this movie was followed up by X2, and then X-Men 3, The Last Stand, which is kind of the divisive one that, you sort of love it or hate it.
Oh, boy.
Then it was sort of a soft reboot, going back to the 60s with X-Men First Class, and then the cast sort of combine in Days of Future Past. And then the Deadpool movies kind of spin off of that, and we just had really kind of the capstone on the Fox era of Marvel movies with Deadpool versus Wolverine, whatever that's called. The Deadpool Wolverine movie was kind
Is
of the cap of
Deadpool an
that.
X-Men? Is he a
Deadpool
mutant?
is he's X-Men adjacent. He's
Okay.
more like he's in X-Force, and he gets his own spin-off comic. He's definitely like within the extended X-Men family, but I don't think you would ever say he's a
Because
member
I
of
was
the
like,
X-Men.
I don't really know that much about Deadpool,
Yeah.
and I just had this moment of being like, wait a second.
Yeah.
Is there a connection here that I didn't know about?
Yeah. But I like I said, I was probably 17 when this movie came out, and it was coming out in a weird time because superhero live action stuff had been kind of campy with things like the Adam West Batman, and then the Wonder Woman series isn't intentionally campy, but it's bright and bubbly and kind of lends itself to that direction.
Is that the one with...
Linda Carter.
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
And then the Superman movies, like Superman, the first one was like a big deal and was a pretty serious movie. And as they progressed, Superman 3 and 4 are not really looked on as favorable and did get a little goofy, particularly 4. And then you had the Tim Burton Batman movie, which was like, oh, finally a serious, grounded Batman after people got over the confusion that Michael Keaton was playing Batman. Then you have Batman Returns, and then Batman Forever and into Batman and Robin, taking us into the late 90s. Those are gooftastic. Like Batman and Robin is like a toy commercial, which, the director was very open about.
Oof.
But it's kind of fun in its own way. So you had sort of like superheroes going goof, and then you had, I think, the Blade movies coming up that were more taking a Marvel property and being like, this is serious. And I think the X-Men movies are really kind of more in that Blade version of like, let's do this serious. So, no colorful costumes, going for a grounded approach. And I think they benefit from that, a more grounded, serious situation. So I've been pretty happy with this whole series. The Wolverine spinoff, the Deadpool spinoff, and then the mainline like X-Men franchise as a whole. I hate X-Men Apocalypse. I think that's the worst one. But for the most part, I think that they're a pretty good time. But, they're right from my era. So I would love to know, Allie, what do you think of X-Men 2000?
Okay. I
Drum
really
roll.
enjoyed X-Men 2000.
Yes! Yes,
And
that's the right answer.
incidentally, I do think I enjoyed it a lot more because of having seen a little bit of the animated series.
Oh,
Because the
okay.
characters were appearing, and I was like, oh, cool, it's them, and not
yeah.
like, who the heck is this? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I feel like that's just...
Yeah.
That's a more enjoyable lens to come to something.
It's a hard start with the Holocaust in the X-Men movie, in the way they sort of, I don't know, I guess subtly, maybe not, but the way they kind of poke at that in Magneto's background, I think justifies a lot of his rightful anger, like towards humanity, but I think that is an interesting wrinkle underneath of it all, that what Magneto's motivations are.
Yeah, I think that makes him a much more compelling character
Yeah.
than he would be otherwise.
Yeah. I think it lives or dies on the casting, and I think Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart have such great chemistry.
They
from
really
the
do.
very first scene. Their relationship is almost entirely subtext. In this movie, you don't learn anything about how they became friends, what their past is, if they ever were friends, when they had a falling out. You don't know, but you kind of get all of that from the looks they give each other, really. I mean, it's even more than dialogue. But who stood out to you cast-wise?
I thought Jean Grey was really good.
Okay.
I thought her casting was good.
She has one line that where he's like, oh, so you can read minds like the professor, and she's like, nowhere near that powerful, and I cringe every time because I hate the way she delivers that line. And I don't think she has a ton to do, but I think she's got something, and I actually think her chemistry with Hugh Jackman is very good.
I agree. I think that was part of what really sold that for me. And I feel like they were a little all over the place with her of like, how powerful is she? How competent is she?
Yes.
Because like, the evil mutants like break in and they like plug in something to Cerebro and this dark, group appears, and that's how you know that it's bad. And like this becomes a problem, but she just like goes in and instantly fixes it. Yeah. Like it's not even a problem. She's just like, here, I immediately found the problem and I just took it out. But then like later, Toad like spits like a weird goop on her face. And she can't figure out any way to deal with that or get it off herself.
Definitely can't do it.
It's like, all right.
Yeah. In the cartoon, and my wife makes fun of me for this all the time, but Cyclops was always my favorite. And he's so square. He's so square in the cartoon. And so like, no, come on, And I remember even back in the day was disappointed with Cyclops in this movie because that is such a charismatic actor. I love that guy. And I think that he could play a really good Cyclops, but it's like the script just isn't there for him.
Yeah. It feels very bare bones with his character.
Yeah. And I think the friction between him and Wolverine is the most interesting thing about it. But you really don't see Cyclops' leadership skills. You don't see him being the responsible one. He really does just come off as sort of the nerd in a lot of ways.
Like a little bit of a crank kind of nerd.
Yeah. I think he and Storm, when they first show up, it's kind of like, oh, cool. But then it's like, oh, okay, no, they're not going to bring much to this. I also remember being a little disappointed with Sabretooth. Because Sabretooth and Wolverine in the comics is such an iconic rivalry. And even in the animated series, when Sabretooth would show up, it's like, whoa, okay, these two hate each other. And to have Sabretooth face off with Wolverine and have them not recognize each other, and really it has no teeth, no pun intended. It just doesn't grab you at all.
I guess I was kind of wondering if they were like trying to show like this is where their rivalry comes from, and in later movies they'll have this real antagonism, but I haven't seen the later movies. So I don't know.
I don't know what their intentions. I don't think this relationship really goes anywhere until the Wolverine spin-offs, and it's hard to say that is the same Sabretooth. I don't really think you could make that argument. So I don't know what their intentions were, but I feel like there are certain characters, if even have seen the series, it's a big deal for those two characters to be together. And to have it be nothing is pretty disappointing. But I liked the younger cast. I've always been an Iceman fan. I think he's a fun Iceman. I like the little romance they have going. It's, again, not a ton for him to do, but I like that they did that.
I thought it was kind of interesting to have the different age groups, like the students and the adults, and have them still kind of be interacting, and they're all X-Men characters, but there's that clear separation at the same time. I thought that was an interesting take on it.
I think so too. Well, the X-Men as created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in the 60s is very, it's the original team is Cyclops, Jean, Beast, Iceman. It's a very small, and Angel. I always forget Angel. It's a small core group, and they're all pretty much on the same level. They're just like the first wave of students. You said that they were looking at making an X-Men movie in the 80s, which makes total sense to me because Chris Claremont and Giant Size X-Men kind of reintroduced the X-Men after they'd pretty much languished. Not much going on with the X-Men during that time. And Claremont introduced new characters like, Nightcrawler and Storm and some of the team that people are a little bit more familiar with. Wolverine. Those were pulled from different parts of comics and kind of put together as these are your X-Men going forward. And Claremont didn't create those characters, but defined them, I would say, in his run. So X-Men's a hot property in the 80s, so that makes sense to me. But this team that came around at that time, I think is really where the concept of the different levels of ages and abilities and experience came in. And I think it's better for it. And over on DC, the Teen Titans were kind of doing the same thing with the new Teen Titans, where the 60s guard kind of became the mentors of a newer generation of heroes, which is a cool thing to do to show that legacy and everything. But rewatching this movie, there's always a concern that it's not going to hold up. And I have watched this movie many times, in the last 25 years or so. So, I mean, I knew it was going to hold up, but I was specifically watching this thinking like, what will Allie think about this? And
watching this in the year 2024.
Yeah, I did think that you would like it. And so I'm glad that you did. What did you think of Rogue?
I thought Rogue was a cool character. I mean, I think like she's just a really intriguing character always. Yeah. And like the whole concept of like she can't touch she can't, but like bad things will happen if she touches anyone. I think that's really interesting. Yeah. I thought it was interesting to see her in kind of a younger role and like, because like I think even in just like the small amount of the animated series that we watched, she's like talked a little bit about some of her backstory and like, oh, I kissed a boy when I was like a kid and like it sent him into a coma. Yeah. And so like seeing some of those things that like you wouldn't see if you're just dealing with like her, grown up with her fully realized powers, I thought was interesting.
I'm trying to think about the last time this version of Rogue was really given much play, because the story in the comics, and they cover this in the X-Men the animated series too, is that you have a very powerful Rogue in the animated series, where she's the powerhouse, she's the strongest one, she has all of these powers, and here she just has the absorption power. She can't fly, she's not strong. Right. Because in the comics, she holds on to Captain Marvel for too long.
And she just kind of like
permanently takes Captain Marvel's power. So Carol Danvers is like kind of depowered in the Marvel world for a long time.
Oops.
And and that's how you see her in the X-Men animated series, like Ms. Marvel.
Gotcha.
Out of the picture. And so that had been the status quo for Rogue for so long, because Rogue was introduced as a villain in the Avengers in her initial entry point. It's interesting to have a movie that is really preaching probably primarily to people who grew up on that cartoon series, and have a Rogue that doesn't have all those powers, doesn't have the confidence. She's a very different version of the character than people would have been used to, which is kind of a big swing, but I think it works for the movie.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting because that's something I was thinking about as we were watching the movie, and there's like so many situations where it's like she's in danger or whatever, and it's like on the one hand, like she's so powerful and can easily debilitate anyone, but on the other hand, if she doesn't want to immediately jump to let me just suck away this person's life force and put them into a coma, there's not a lot she can do besides that, which is a really interesting kind of like a glass cannon situation almost. Yeah. That I thought was intriguing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it gives you a lot of room to grow, a lot of places to take these characters, which I think is always cool. I do think, as I said, Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen are so great in those roles. Hugh Jackman is a very atypical, now it's so common, but it's an atypical choice for Wolverine. Because in the comics, he's older, he's grizzled, he's this, he's like 5'5", like burly little Canadian ball of rage. And you cast like Broadway star, good looking Hugh Jackman, 6 foot whatever Hugh Jackman, is a weird choice. For both the comics and from the animated series, it's a choice that should not work. And yet somehow
it really does.
So what do you think of him as Wolverine?
I thought he was a good Wolverine. I feel like the attitude and the like, just like his approach to the world. Yeah. I felt like Hugh Jackman did a really good job portraying that.
The initial shot of him like in the cage fight, just sort of leaning up against the cage, like smoking this cigar, and you just see him from behind with the hair and everything. It's like, how do they make a comic book just like come to life, in the form of Hugh Jackman? It's a great introduction of the character, great use of the powers. I really have no complaints about his performance in this movie. I think it's dead on.
I have one complaint, but it's not really about his performance.
Hit me.
It's about his hair.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's so cringy to me. I get that they're trying to kind of like give a little homage to the comic books, sort of replicate that look a little bit without doing the full costume. I mean, I also think that the way that his hair is drawn in the comics looks silly too.
It does.
It's that much worse to me in live action, just the little like tuft situation.
Yeah. I think depending on the movie, it gets both better and worse. I think in the Wolverine movie, it's better. But here, there's a couple times where he got up and I'm like, okay, but you had to have a round brush and a hairdryer to achieve this look, my man. So,
but also, why would you try? Why is this the look you're trying to achieve? Yeah.
So he's like, I want not one pompadour, but 2, if you could, and please,
just kind of on
the back, and
almost little horns.
Yeah, and I need points. I need rigid points in this hairdo. Okay, that's a good note. I love the final scene in the Statue of Liberty.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the whole Ellis Island and Statue of Liberty.
I think that's
sequence.
a fun location to have a
It
showdown.
is.
It's so
It is.
iconic and recognizable.
Yeah.
And there's a certain oh no factor of like, are they going to accidentally wreck the Statue of Liberty in the process of this? You know?
Yeah. So in 1999, I took my first trip to New York State from Michigan, and we went to New York City, and we went to the Statue of Liberty, and like we were in that area. We were up in the Statue of Liberty's head, which is much smaller than it is in that movie. But I was still, when I watched this, delighted because I had just been there, and I was like, hey.
That is cool.
So yeah, I've basically been in an X-Men movie, is what it comes
pretty much.
down to.
Pretty much.
But I love the whole scene. We haven't talked about Mystique yet. How do you feel about Rebecca Romijn as Mystique?
I thought she was good. I think that's such a weird character though. Like just, I don't know. Like she's blue and she goes around and she turns into people. Like I don't know.
Into people, sure.
I think anytime you have kind of a shape-shifting character and you're like, wait, is this person actually this person or is it Mystique? I think that's always an interesting dynamic. I think it's a little weird that she doesn't wear any clothes.
Yeah.
Feels a little dehumanizing.
It does. Yeah,
and
that's a product of its time for sure.
Which I get, but I'm a little bit like, I mean, I feel like the identity of the X-Men story is like mutants. They're still humans, but they've got some bonus powers and some of those like conflict between people. And it feels a little weird to be like, yeah, so we're going to just make this, she's going to be like a weird naked blue monster lady.
Yeah.
Like,
I think
it feels a little tone deaf.
Of course, correct that a little later, and that's not her look in the comics either. So it is, it was a swing that they took there. To fight where she is Wolverine at the end, and then they don't know who is right, and you don't know who is right, and everything.
I think that's really cool.
When Cyclops is like, "How do I know it's you?" When Wolverine hits him with that sick burn is so funny.
And he's just like, "All right,
yeah." He's like, "Oh yeah, that checks out. That checks out." Yeah.
Yeah, I've got no more questions.
I love it. I love it. It's so good. Watching it this time when I guess light spoilers for X-Men.
Yeah, pause and go watch it if you need to real quick.
When Rogue is up in the machine in the torch and they're trying to figure out how to get up there and they're like, can Storm send Wolverine? Can Storm send Cyclops? Watching it this time, I was like, Storm can fly. Why doesn't she just go up there? She's Storm. You know what I mean? It doesn't cross anyone's mind that Storm just
Is it while she's still like stuck in the like restraints
no, she's
or
not
whatever?
Stuck.
Okay.
She's not stuck anymore.
I was trying to be
that.
generous to them, but
it's just one of those things that this time I was like, well, that's
and
goofy.
they're like, Gene, try and steady him. It's like, okay.
I know.
I feel like maybe they were just trying to pull like everyone in the team has to participate to make this happen thing. But
yeah, Magneto's plan I think is really good. I think the reveal on the train when he's coming for again spoilers, but please if watch this movie. But when you spend the whole time thinking that he is chasing Logan. And
they're like, why is he chasing Logan? It's like, I don't know, maybe because he could easily control his entire body. Just an idea.
Right. But when you get to the reveal that was never the plan, I think that's a really good moment.
I agree.
And you see the realization on Wolverine's face.
And he's like, oh no. And then he's like floating in the air, stuck. Yeah.
Yeah. It's good.
It is good.
It
is good. And I thought it was kind of fun that they used the like Rogue powering of the machine to like do her white streak
the white
thing.
streak. Yeah,
that was kind of a cool tie-in.
I think so too. I think that it holds up remarkably well. I don't know that I would make the same statements about the sequels. It's been a while since I've seen them, but the simplicity of the look and everybody, there's nothing to me that really is like, this is an old-timey movie, but I'm an old-timey man, so.
I don't feel like it was that old-timey either.
Okay.
There was nothing that I was watching and I was like, well, that's clearly from the year 2000, you know?
I think it's remarkable how well it holds up, and I feel like should Marvel ever decide to make an X-Men movie, which I would say they've certainly been leaning in that directions with Multiverse of Madness and the end scene and the Marvels. I mean, and of course, Deadpool and Wolverine, where suddenly we have Wolverine back. It's going to be tough. I think it's going to be tough to top that movie. I really do.
Yeah. I agree. Well, especially because I feel like something that's interesting about like the Avengers is like they're a team, but they're always kind of a very loose team.
Right.
And they don't always get along, which of course makes sense. You have that dynamic in a team. But it's like the X-Men they're always a team.
Yeah.
And they like have so many rough edges and like don't always get along and everything. But like I feel like they operate much better as a team than the Avengers do.
Right.
And so having done so many Avengers movies, I'd be curious if Marvel was like, we're going to put out an X-Men movie, how that dynamic would compare.
Well, I mean, it's the same with the Justice League. It's like these are all solo characters who, when a big threat comes in, they team up. But the X-Men is at its core an ensemble. That's all it is.
Right.
And if you look at the history of X-Men standalone comics, with the exception of Wolverine, they just don't really run. They don't work. The characters are just so
it's like you need at least two, maybe three of them to kind
on
of make
each
it
other,
really
that
work.
it's kind of it's interesting that you really have to have them as a unit, know. So I think that will be a unique challenge, and I know that Marvel already has Fantastic Four geared up. But the Fantastic Four is such a, there's siblings and a married couple within that, so you already have those set dynamics. It'll be, I don't know, I just can't picture it. I keep thinking, like when WandaVision was happening, I was like, are they going to use WandaVision to introduce the concept of mutants? And then, Ms. Marvel, I think, has been identified as a mutant, and we've seen mutants like in this world now. I still have trouble picturing how an X-Men movie fits in that greater world.
I agree.
And I think that's always a challenge in X-Men stories, even in the comics, because I don't see how you can have the Avengers and then have a world that is so glaringly racist against mutants. Like how the Avengers aren't stepping in on that at some point, like why the X-Men are always going alone. It almost feels, even when you read the books, the comics, that it doesn't.
Yeah, it feels a little odd.
Yeah.
And it also feels like, there's like so many X-Men. And there's so many Avengers. It feels like as soon as you try and have them teaming up and doing stuff, it's just... it's like that Spider-Man crossover episode where he was like, yeah, I'm going to grab all the Fantastic Four, and then there's the X-Men. I guess I'll just take one of them.
A single X-Men and it's Storm. Yeah, I know. It is odd. And then you have like Avengers versus X-Men, which was I think, pretty well-received arc in the comics, maybe polarizing, but they don't always gel like in a greater world. Like the X-Men have an X-Men world, and it's weird to also. And here's Spider-Man, or here's Black Widow. Like it's odd.
And I feel like the X-Men world, at least from what I've seen, feels very earthy, and like they're dealing with these, human problems all the time. And I feel like the Avengers world feels a little more like idealistic and
true.
I don't know. And I feel like the tone of those worlds is a little different.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the Avengers present kind of an aspirational world, and the X-Men are sort of like, well, here's the reality. This sucks.
This is what we're dealing with.
We're doing our best. Yeah, true. It's true. I've always gravitated towards the X-Men. I do. The found family stuff speaks to me, and I think just the very human complications that their lives have are things that are not super common always in comics, know, and it's such a part of it, like the team dynamic and the interpersonal, both complications and connections. I think just add a layer that you can't get in other kind of stories. So,
well, and I think it's cool that like the characters are like they're from different places. They have like Wolverine is Canadian, Rogue is from this out. Like I feel like that's an interesting like just little touch to their characters that I feel like really makes them feel a lot more real, and that doesn't always happen in ensemble casts, that I think is a cool choice.
Well, I'm delighted that you liked it. I hoped you would. I thought you would. And I wonder, do you have any plans to continue on?
Yes.
Okay.
So yesterday, Caleb and I did start watching X2.
Oh, okay.
However, I was feeling dizzy and had to lie down.
Okay.
And then we didn't have time to finish it.
But
we will finish it before the next bookshelf, so
okay.
we can talk about it in more depth then.
I have, like Eric from previously on X-Men, thinks that X-Men 2 is like the greatest of superhero movies. X-Men 2 and Spider-Man 2 are like his big two pull. I don't think the sequel is as good as the original, and I think it repeats a lot of the original. It feels very like, I remember this, but you get new characters like Nightcrawler, and there's a lot of interesting things that happen. The third movie is a retelling of the Dark Phoenix saga, and it just, in my mind, doesn't land right. And then the further you go, X-Men Days of Future Past is one of my absolute favorites, but it's one that like I think you can really only appreciate if you're watching the whole saga,
right?
Because it pulls from all these different eras, and you have to kind of have that. But once you get into the Jennifer Lawrence era and everything, I don't know. I would love to hear your take on all of these movies. So if you choose to watch,
we'll see
more,
how far I get.
You have to keep us posted.
I will. I will do that.
Okay. Well, of course, we have many X-Men things here in the collection. Lots of comics, lots of movies. And sometimes Allie and I pop up on the Radio Meanwhile show previously on X-Men. But you can go over there for all of your X-Men insight and knowledge. They cover all the movies. They've completely covered the original animated series, are working on X-Men 97, plus a lot of one-off comic runs and character spotlights. So if you're an X-Men fan, definitely go over to previously on X-Men.
Yeah, I feel like if you like X-Men, there's no reason not to.
You have
You have to. You're basically obligated.
Yep. And I know that there are more X-Men Spider-Man crossovers, so you and I may be drafted again for future episodes. Yes.
All right. Well, Nick, I know you like the X-Men.
Yes.
A world that has like a little bit of a magical feel.
Sure.
Something else with a magical feel that you might like. Have you tried Terry Pratchett's Tiffany Aching series?
I have not. I have not read any Terry Pratchett ever. Because I feel like I wouldn't like it. That's always why I don't.
I understand that. Well, I know you're not like the biggest into fantasy.
That's an understatement.
And frankly,
yes.
I'm with you there.
All right.
But I loved fantasy as a kid, and I didn't read much for many years.
Okay.
Mostly because I was annoyed with love triangle, dramatic YA fantasy. Yeah. But I started reading Terry Pratchett's books in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I've been delighted.
Here for the journey.
Right?
I've been right along.
They're short. They're hilarious. I think you'll have a good time.
All right.
And I think the Tiffany Aching series is the best.
Okay, what is it? How is it? Because it's Terry
part
Pratchett's
of Discworld.
Like Discworld. Okay, It is. Yeah, all right.
And Discworld, there's like 43 books or something like that. Yeah. And I feel like that's really intimidating to people until you realize that it's kind of just a bunch of series that are all set in the same world.
All right. So
Tiffany Aching follows.
What is the first book?
The first book is in the Tiffany Aching series.
Yes.
The We Free Men.
Okay.
So my suggestion is read The We Free Men. If you can, also read A Hatful of Sky, which is the second one.
Okay.
And they're not horribly long, but if you don't have time, you don't have time.
All right.
I think A Hatful of Sky is that much better. Like I think the first one is great, but I feel like they just get better and better with each book.
I have to be open. I have a bad attitude about this. I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it. It's
a good time. It's fall. Halloween's almost here. It's a perfect time to read about a 9-year-old witch learning to be a witch.
Boy.
She gets a little older.
You're not selling this to me, but I trust your judgment, so I will.
I think you'll be.
Aside.
You might not love it, but I think you'll be surprised.
Okay.
I think you won't dislike it as much as you think you.
Well, I don't think it's going to be bad. I feel like I'm predisposed to not be into this thing. It's a hard sell. But I have to grow, right?
Yeah.
I have to
this
grow.
is a moment of growth
point,
for you.
At some point,
this is a sliding doors
and
moment.
It's going to be with a book called We Free Men. Sure.
Yes.
Sure. We as in small?
Yeah.
Okay. Ooh. All right.
You can do it. I believe in you.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it.
All right. Okay. Well, folks, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Hopefully, Nick will still be alive and have survived the We Free Men.
I can do it.
And we'll be talking about everything that we're reading, watching, whatever else we're doing.
Yeah.
And then it's time for you to face your fate.
I have to give you just one quick recommendation.
Okay.
And it's the Netflix series Nobody Wants This with Kristen Bell and Adam Brody.
Oh, I feel like I was seeing an ad for that.
I think that you would. It's a 10 episode. It's a rom-com-y sitcom. Just finished the first season last night, and I was like, Allie needs to watch this.
Okay, I'm writing this down in my notes so I remember it.
Do it. Also, Colin from Accounts, which is on Paramount Plus. I think that you would love both of these shows.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Good.
This is not a but have you tried. This is just a friendly suggestion for you. I intend to talk about Nobody Wants This in our bookmark. So if you want to watch any of it for us to discuss,
okay, noted.
I would not be opposed to that. But I'm glad that I finished it because my time is going to be taken up with Terry Pratchett.
Yeah.
And I have to be okay with that.
It's going to be life full of Terry Pratchett.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we'll see what happens. I'll see you next time.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.